Hi, and welcome to my podcast, The Bonnie Earl Show. This is a place where you will hear real conversations with real women about real life. In this episode, however, I want to share with you a little bit about my backstory and my journey to becoming an author. And so my name is Bonnie Earl, and for 35 years, I worked in the public education system. I began my career as a classroom teacher, then school counselor, district counselor, elementary school principal, and secondary school principal. My passion has always been about making a difference. And so then at midlife, my husband Richard and I were separated for 4 years. Instead of a divorce, we had a reaffirmation of our vows. We were getting our happily ever after. But then, 1 year later, he was diagnosed with a terminal illness called ALS and told he had 2.5 years to live. Our world was completely shattered. It was through that journey that I was propelled on a spiritual quest to find answers. I was guided to Reiki, energy healing. I was guided to spiritual teachers, spiritual books. There were so many things that I learned during that time. Now, also during that time, my husband Richard wrote one chapter of what was to be a book. And that book never was finished. I promised him that one day I would finish our story. Now, that was 30 years ago. In 2017, I wrote a piece of our story in Bridget Lessard-Diel's anthology, When Women Talk. In 2024, I wrote another snippet of my journey in Suzanne Gieseman's book, Mediumship, Sacred Conversations with Loved Ones Across the Veil. But my book remained unwritten until May 4th, 2025. And so I want to read this excerpt to you. May 4th, 2025. It was a quiet morning, the kind I usually cherish. Breakfast in bed, coffee beside me, book in hand, a moment of stillness to receive something new. But that day, I couldn't absorb a single word. I kept rereading the same sentence, flipping pages. My thoughts tugged elsewhere, vague but persistent. A restlessness stirred in my chest, a knowing, an ache. And then, like a distant memory knocking gently, not heard with ears, but with every cell, the voice, calm, steady, all-knowing. When are you going to finish your book? ALS, My Greatest Teacher. I stopped. The words weren't a question. They felt like a quiet summons. I whispered the question aloud. When am I going to finish my book? ALS, My Greatest Teacher. I sat stunned, and suddenly it was as if my life played like a movie before my eyes. I was no longer the woman who built the retreat center, not the grieving widow, not the dutiful principal, not even the seasoned life empowerment coach. I was someone else now, someone more whole. The movie flashed to just 1 month before at my 75 years loved celebration. Surrounded by family and friends, I saw myself stand lace my fingers together and say, having my two worlds in one place, I feel more whole, more seen. The voice had known. It wasn't asking me to go back, it was asking me to go deeper, to gather the pieces I had lived, the lessons I had carried, the truths I now had wrestled in silence, and offer them now fully as a gift. This book wasn't just a story, it was a transmission, a message that could no longer be delayed. The truth landed with a force that couldn't be ignored. I was no longer meant to be the one simply reading someone else's words. It was time to share my own. I got out of bed suddenly lit from within and began gathering the pieces of the journey I'd already written. I searched for the contact information of an editor from one of the anthologies I'd worked with before. I couldn't find it. Then I opened my inbox. An announcement with her new contact info. Synchronicity? No. Alignment. Clear words arrived. Your book doesn't need to be a long book, but it must be true. Think Louise Hay's little blue book or the Four Agreements. It's not meant to impress. It's meant to serve. At the end of each chapter, offer lessons and reflections. Then invite readers to consider their own intimate thresholds, their own awakenings, their own truths rising. This book has now taken on a life of its own timing. It waited patiently while I lived the pages. Even as a little girl, I somehow knew. At age 4, I felt it in my bones. I was meant to teach, to speak, to guide. That quiet knowing never left me. It flickered through every chapter of my life, even when I forgot. Why this book? Why now? Because the world is grieving. Because so many hearts have forgotten how to stay open. Because change is upon us, and some don't yet know how to walk through it awake. This is not just the story of one woman's awakening or one couple's fierce, tender love. It's a lighthouse, a soul blueprint, a way home. I offer it now because presence is medicine. Truth, told tenderly, can heal. And love that endures beyond death reminds us what is real. The one great lesson. ALS awakened my soul, and it will not go back to sleep. And so what I now know is that what seemed like a long time, 30 years ago, I made this promise to finish this book. And yet everything was being divinely orchestrated. Everything had its divine timing. So that was May 4th, 2025. I contacted the publisher. We set a manuscript deadline date of the middle of July. And almost on a daily basis, I would wake up and I would be guided to write another piece of the story. And some days there was a whole lot of resistance. I don't want to write that. I don't want to include that. You know how that inner critic works. And yet, every step of the way, I have trusted. I've simply trusted. And the book, by God's grace, will be published the end of October, so October 2025 or November, in that time frame. And it feels as though it's a divine gift. It really is intended to be a gift for women, for men, for couples who are at a threshold of some kind. Yours may not be ALS, it may be something completely different. But I absolutely trust that this book will find the people it's intended to find. And so thank you very, very much for being here, for being a part of this expanding community. If you would like to receive updates about my book, ALS My Greatest Teacher, a journey of awakening, loving, and surrendering, you can send me an email, bonnie@bonnieearl.ca. In the subject line, put book update. If you would like to be a guest on an upcoming episode of The Bonnie Earl Show, send an email to that same address, and in the subject line, put podcast guest. So again, thank you for being here, and I really, truly look forward to meeting you in the near future. Bye for now.